Hello, and welcome back to the Onward Shift Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic which affects us all, but we don't want to talk about. And the guest today is Kate. Kate, how are you?
Hello. Yeah, I'm really good. And I'm really excited to be this side of the microphone for once, actually.
Well, for once, I'm absolutely terrified of this conversation. My hands are a bit sweaty, and I feel bloody uncomfortable. But I know it's a conversation we have to have because it affects each and every one of us many times in our life. But it's about time we tell the guests what we're gonna be talking about. So over to you, and I'll just take
Okay.
a deep breath.
You can have a minute to chill. So I run a company called Grieve Then Achieve, and I'm a grief coach, and I work with those who are struggling to cope with loss, and which we'll talk about a little bit later. I think about what loss means, but not necessarily just bereavement. So I try and help people navigate the complexities of grief. And I work with corporates to help them have a bit more grief education training, understand what grief looks like in the workplace. And then I work with individuals as well to help them on a kind of a one-to-one basis. And then I'm just about to start running groups as well, because I think with grief, you need community. And we don't have many groups based locally. So I'm based in Suffolk, and I'd like to set up some grief groups as well. So yeah, there's lots going on, and it's a really important topic because we don't talk about it enough. But each and every one of us will face loss at some point in our lives.
Absolutely. Well, I didn't realize that you're gonna have, these community groups set up because I've actually never ever heard of even that existing because I'm so naive to this thing. I avoid as much as I possibly can because it's such a hard conversation, Kate. I wouldn't know where to start. I don't know where to stop. I don't know what the right thing to say is. It's so weird. I've got so much to say in life, but when it comes to grief and somebody going through a loss, I almost become speechless. So
Yeah.
so I guess it would be nice to start with what is loss and how loss can kind of affect us with different forms because personally, I think when somebody asks me like what is loss, I can go, well, someone who's passed away. I can say maybe a pet that's passed away. My brain goes down the route of thinking, maybe you can grieve a job or a friend or or I don't know. And then I guess you can also grieve people who are alive but no longer in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's not like you say, it's not an easy topic to talk about. It's so complex, and I assume I can only make an assumption here that you grieve to all of these things differently. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, possibly, sort of. I mean, we go through so many losses in our lives, and you're right, absolutely. Pet loss, baby loss, loss of health, loss of finances, loss of a business, divorce, empty nesting, our children growing up, the loss of having a child that needs you, um, it's the hopes and dreams of the future, the loss of menopause, huge grief in menopause and leaving youth behind. And I think most of the time we don't necessarily realize that there's a grieving process behind all that loss. So we have a very complicated association with what's going on. We don't really realize that we're grieving. And yes, of course, bereavement, absolutely. It's the first thing that most people think about. I'm grieving, a loss, I'm grieving a bereavement. But yeah, estrangement, not talking to people anymore. Like I say, that divorce, anybody that's not in your life anymore, you're grieving for something, you're grieving for the future, basically. What's not now going to happen because of the event or the loss.
Wow, I've never thought of it by like that. You're grieving for the future. Wow, you've completely stumped me with that because I've never heard that. Never in my life have I heard that expression before. And as soon as you said that, I was like, oh my God, yeah. You're not only grieving the person or the job title or the money, you're actually also grieving that dream of, that dream you have of the future. Wow, that is deep, Kate. Wow,
Yeah.
that is real
I
deep.
know.
Oh, I like this
Don't have me
conversation.
on if you don't want to go deep.
My God, I love it. I love it. No, this is already blown my mind and we're 5 minutes in. Okay. So how do you cope with it? Because again, as a man. I'm not very good at crying, so but I am exceptionally good at bottling it in. So how does one go about even processing grief? Like, how do I process it? Because I know, so a little bit, I don't know if you know this, but in the Indian culture, and I think there's other cultures that do this as well, we have open casket. So I remember being, gosh, I must have been an early teenager, and I went to my first funeral, and it was, I believe, of my grandma, and it was absolutely petrifying. It was really, really scary. And you saw all the men standing in the corner, not one tear shed, and then you hear the women expressing their emotions, which in my opinion is a normal thing to do.
Yeah.
But as a man, I don't understand what grief is. I can see a dead body in front of my face, and I can see there's no life there, and I can understand that. But I don't think I've ever grieved and I think that's weird. I think I should, but I've never done it. So how does one go about even starting the process of grieving? And I know that sounds stupid, but honestly, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the grieving process, it happens from that loss. So whatever that loss is, let's talk about bereavement because it's the one thing that most people will resonate with. But the grief almost depends on that complex relationship that you have with that person as well, because we can be grieving for the relationship that we never had with that person and the relationship we're never going to have with that person. So again, the hopes and dreams of the future. And often I work with a lot of people who have very complex grief because of the complex relationship that they had with the person. And it can be very conflicting because if you haven't had a very good relationship with someone, you can't really understand why you're grieving. But grieving is a full body process. It is like trauma being stored in the body. We can absolutely store grief in our body. And that's almost the problem. We're not letting that grief out. And grief isn't necessarily just crying and tears. It's the display of emotion, and the grieving process is a whole process. And there's a brilliant book to read called The Grieving Brain, which is where Mary Frances O'Connor talks about how the brain physically changes through grief. She's just written another book called The Grieving Body as well, because she also talks about how the body stores grief. So it is a full body experience when you're grieving. And the way to process that, and as much as we think the way to process it, and I think the many years previous, our way of trying to grieve was to try and stop thinking about that person and sort of push
Yeah.
those emotions down, push them away. You stop thinking about them, and therefore the grief will go away. But actually, now we realise that continuing bonds with somebody is the way to grieve. So you try and integrate that person into your life. You don't stop the bond with that person just because they're not physically here. So you'll cook their favourite recipes, and that will be reminding you of them. You'll grow a tree in the garden, and that's your continuing bond with that person as you kind of tend to that grief. You'll visit places that perhaps they wanted to go to, then they didn't actually get to go to. So it's about integrating that person into your life whilst you're going through that mourning process and that grieving process.
Okay. Sorry. How do you let go then? Or have I jumped the gun here? I feel I completely understand to almost keep that connection, which is beautiful. I think that's absolutely beautiful. But at some stage, I guess you have to let go. Maybe I've
Or do,
jumped the gun.
or do you have to let go? Because we have this phrase about moving on, but actually, what are you moving on from? Because if it was a good relationship and there was love, you want to carry that love with you for the rest of your life. So there's nothing to move on from. What there is for the great grieving process to become a little easier. And for me, the term acceptance that we all use is really understanding that that person's gone and accepting that you'll always be grieving, but that the pain will get slightly less. So in the beginning stages, you might not even be able to look at a photo because it is so painful. But with some work further down the line, you might then be able to look at a photograph and have happy memories. So that's being able to be part of the grieving process, and the grieving process to kind of be working almost. So the grieving process isn't necessarily stopping crying. That those tears are emotions. You need to cry. It's cathartic for you to get it out of the body. But the process that I try and help people with is to take the pain out of that grief.
Gosh, I'm absolutely speechless. This is so interesting. You've absolutely blown my mind already. Because now I'm almost seeing it from a completely different perspective of, yeah, you're absolutely right. All my life I've been taught accept it and kind of get over it and move on. But I don't think you ever can accept it and totally, and I don't think you can ever move on. So how do we manage the pain? Because the pain is the thing that's, I guess the pain is the tears and the endless crying and the uncontrollable feeling of loneliness and emptiness inside. So how do you manage that pain? Because that feels very hard.
Yeah, it's heavy. And grief is really heavy and it makes us feel really heavy. But it's also, it can be anger, can be resentment, can be injustice. So not necessarily always that deep sadness. Again, completely depends on the complex relationship that you had with that person. But
Mhm.
the continuing bonds and the way of integrating helps to soften, helps to soften that grief. So you just over time and with the right sort of processes and being able to talk about your grief, how you're feeling, and really understand grief and understand how you're feeling and where it's coming from. Because there's no manual with grief, and everybody grieves so differently, which makes it really quite complex. So you'll have two siblings who are grieving, their mum or their dad, and you would think that they potentially might grieve in exactly the same way, but they grieve completely differently. And that's almost again the problem with grief, because people have a view about how you should be grieving because of what worked or what didn't work for them. And they then can't understand somebody else's grief because, well, that's not how I grieve. That's not right. But again, there's no right or wrong as long as you're using coping mechanisms that are safe, and it's not necessarily, you're not using drugs and alcohol and, you know, coping mechanisms that aren't good for you. As long as you're finding a way to cope with the grief in your own way that's safe, then it's your own grieving journey. And that's the bit that I facilitate people with. I help them with their own grieving journey, which is why absolutely everybody that sits in front of me is so different. And that's why I just absolutely love my job, because everybody's grief and grieving process is so different. And I get to help them with that. I mean, it's such an absolute privilege, but it is so different for everyone.
I'm I don't know the right word, but I'm absolutely, I admire you and adore you because you having to sit, you choosing to sit opposite someone to take on all of their pain and their hurt and be willing to be a listening ear is absolutely just mind-boggling. And all therapists, coaches, and psychiatrists, and all of the mental health world is just, it fascinates me. But let's say, right, let's say I don't know, I've lost a family member, they've passed, and I I I give you a call. Well, I pluck up the courage, and I go, I'm going to speak to Kate today, and I'm going to get booked in, and I'm going to come see you. What does that even look like? Because
Mhm.
like, what does it look like sitting opposite you in a room, feeling so uncomfortable, knowing you're probably going to shed a lot of tears? What does that look like in the room with you?
Yeah, I mean, that process is, it's such a unique relationship, and again, it is such a privilege, and I can't stress that enough. And firstly, it's amazing when someone recognizes that they need support, because we try and, we try and work through things ourselves, or we'll try and use family members. But the relationship with myself being a grief coach is very different from any other relationship that you will have, because you end up knowing nothing about me and end up telling me everything about you. So, but that's almost the beauty in it, because in this non-judgmental, safe space, I don't know you and I have no agenda. I'm not trying to fix you. Most people around you will want to fix you because you're in pain and they want to provide a solution. But you and I know there's no solution. I can't bring, let's say it's bereavement, I can't bring that person back. So I'm not sitting there like a friend would or like a family member. I'm not trying to fix you. I'm trying to help facilitate the grief and your grief journey. So one of the first sessions is really just allowing people to feel safe in that space and helping facilitate them to be able to talk openly and vulnerably. We don't cry in front of strangers. It's quite a unique experience, and again, a privilege for me. But you have to be open and vulnerable and honest, because that's the way you're going to get the best out of this, the relationship. But that vulnerability is so key, because most people will be sort of masking their grief and about how they're really feeling. Their friends will ask them and it'll be, I'm fine, because they don't want to burden other people or to make other people feel that we aren't very good with other people's emotions. So when someone asks us how we are when we cry, our automatic reaction is to stop them doing that, like we have, hurt them. So for someone to be able to know that they are going to be able to cry in front of me, and I tell them at the start of the session, there's tissues all around you, but I'm not going to give them to you. They are there and you help yourself. But I will facilitate you through your grief. But if there's sadness, you let that sadness come. If there's anger, let's talk about that anger. Where's that coming from? So it is such a unique relationship. And one of the first sessions is very much just tell me everything that you want to tell me. And then the way I say it is, I've got two sayings that I use all the time, that basically you're just a big jigsaw puzzle, but all your pieces are all a little bit all over the place. And my work with you is helping you shift those jigsaw pieces back into some sort of feature.
Mhm.
Or I say that the relationship is a bit, what we're going to talk about is a bit like a ball of wool that's not neatly wrapped up, and we potentially will pull one thread, but there'll be a load of others. What you've come for and what you're talking about isn't necessarily what we're going to be talking about in 3, 4, 5, 6 sessions time, because we're such complex beings and we have so many complex layers. We'll unpeel a layer and then there'll be another one, and then there'll be another one. So yeah, buckle up, because it's a bumpy ride, but it's so worth it. And I'm such a big advocate for, for talking and coaching and therapy and all the talk therapies that are out there.
I love that. And you're absolutely right in saying, because from personal experience, although I haven't seen a grief coach, I have seen other coaches, ADHD, life, nutrition, and I've also seen psychiatrists for cognitive behavioral therapy, etc., etc. And there's one stigma that's always attached is, I'm going to be judged, I'm going to feel embarrassed about stuff. But I can only talk from my own personal experience. Every specialist I've seen, there's never been any judgment. There's never been any, oh my God, or there's never been any uncomfortability. The biggest uncomfortability is speaking. But it's weird. I find once you start speaking, it's so much easier to get the flow going, and then you start getting your sentences out, and then all of a sudden it's just like, you know,
Yeah, I was
word
up.
vomit. Yeah, yeah. Oh my God, yeah, absolutely. But going back to grief. So let's say, somebody is passing, but they haven't passed. That type of grief is, in my opinion, I don't know, again, you have to correct me, and please do correct me if I'm wrong in anything. Um, that type of grief feels different to somebody actually passing. Is there a way to manage that? I don't know if manage is the right word either, but is there a way to process that? Because that's going to be a different type of grieving process in comparison to never seeing that person again.
Yeah, yeah. That's anticipatory grief. And I have this conversation with people all the time
Really?
about um eh, and I've done a podcast with somebody who has experienced both types of grief. Anticipatory grief, where their mum had dementia and sort of, died over a long period of time. And then I think their dad it was a podcast I recorded a while back, but I think their dad then had a heart attack and died instantly. So they
Oh God.
had the anticipatory grief and then the shock of this other grief, but it wasn't anticipatory. And everybody that I speak to says, oh, it'd be so much better if I had time. And then some people will say, oh, I wouldn't want time. It would be so much better if that person just died. And so we have this like conflicting conversations all the time about what's better. Obviously, we don't want that person to go, so nothing's better. But that anticipatory grief is almost like you grieve twice. So you grieve for the person that isn't there, and dementia and Alzheimer's are really good examples of this, because the person is physically there. So then there's that guilt of, I'm grieving for this person, but they're still here. How can I be grieving for them? But especially with dementia, you may have lost that person, from they may not recognize you, or, you may have lost them in their, in how you knew them. So and with illness as well, somebody who's again dying over perhaps a long period of time because of illness, there's that anticipatory grief that that going to come to the end of life at some point. So you grieve then, but it doesn't stop the grief when they've died. So it's not like you can go, I've done my grieving, and now they've died, and that's okay because I was grieving before. Actually, you end up grieving twice because you grieve before they've gone, and then when they go, it's always shocking, even if you kind of knew it and thought you were going to be prepared and be resilient for it. It's still shocking when they're gone, and you're still incredibly sad and miss them and want them back. So there's that grief. It can be over a very long period of time as well. So sometimes it can be a bit of a double whammy of grief, really.
And let's say you're a family member. How do you support? How do you support that person going through it? Because not everyone is going to have the financials, or they might not have the courage to come and see a specialist like yourself, Kate, but they will have friends and family around them who want to help. Well, I guess one thing I've taken from you already is it's not about solutions. I'm not coming in going, oh, this is like, this is a construction project and we're going to do A, B, and C. And if you can't do A, B, C, we're going to do blah, 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 blah.
Gonna
It
fix
doesn't
you.
sound like that. Yeah, exactly. But it sounds like it's completely not that. It sounds like this is really about the art of listening. But again, over
It
to
is.
you.
Is absolutely facilitating that conversation, and just never start with you should, or you get a lot of sort of platitudes in grief and we think we're helping by saying things, oh, they had a good life, or well, there's so many that I can't even think of them right now, but the kind of the things that we say that we think are helping, but they're absolutely not, because it doesn't matter if you had 1,000 years with someone, it wouldn't be enough if you had a good relationship with them. So when you're supporting someone going through grief, absolutely there's no fixing. You cannot fix what's gone on, but what you can do is be open and facilitate them to be open and vulnerable with you, so they don't have to mask how they're feeling. So when you ask how they are, really ask how they are, but also it's a bit of an odd question because you know that they're not great. So, how have you been feeling today? Make it more specific. How's sleep going? If you know they're really struggling with sleep, for example, make it quite targeted. Make it like you understand and that you really do care how they are emotionally, physically. There's so many things to consider, that financially, their own health. When you're grieving, your immunity can be down, so you find that you end up being ill quite a lot through the grieving process. There's just so many things that grief affects, and just being that supportive person for them, not fixing, just being there, being open. And if you don't know the words to say that. Look, there's no words for this. This is absolutely horrendous. This is horrific. I'm absolutely with you. Let's just sit. Let me make the tea. And I think we'll often get text messages like, let me know if I can do anything for you. And when you're grieving, you're so overwhelmed, you don't even know what you need. So some of the best things that you can do is, I'm coming around at 4:00 to walk the dog. I've left a lasagna on the kitchen mat for you, on your doormat for you. It's that, wanting nothing in return, but being able to be specific with the type of help that you can provide, because you're so overwhelmed you don't even want to think about it. You're not thinking about eating. You're not necessarily thinking about picking the kids up from school or the dog, and if someone can just come in and just do that for you, it just takes the pressure off and means it's something less to think about. So it's about just providing as much support as you can, but without trying to fix.
Oh, and going back to this anticipation grief, I believe you called it. Is there like a rule book for that? Because I know everyone is different, but how can you how can you almost help someone going through that, or uh how do you feel if you're going through that? So there's two questions there, sorry. So how does the person who's going through it feel, and is there anything they can do to help themselves? And from an outside perspective, let's say your friend Jimmy, he wants to help. What can he do? Because anticipation grief isn't going to be the same questions you would ask after somebody has passed away. So, yeah.
It's the grief. The grief itself is very similar. You might be, because the grief is
Really?
the emotions. So you might be really angry. Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to them? That injustice, why us as a family? Or it might just be absolute sadness. And a lot of the time it's the helplessness and the hopelessness that comes with grief, and especially with anticipatory grief. There's nothing you can do. And it's that's so heavy, and so you feel so helpless. So again, okay, it might not be that imminent so that you can't say, look, here's some food on your doormat, but it is, again, being able to facilitate that open conversation, so that if someone is not feeling great, they're able to tell you, rather than you say, how are you? And they go, I'm fine. You're probably not. So let's talk about it. So being the type of person that somebody wants to talk to, and being open, and just making sure that you are making yourself available
Mm.
for them, but not that kind of, let's meet up at some point. Shall we meet up on Saturday? Let's have a coffee. Tell me how you really are. It's about being kind of structured, being there. And especially when you're grieving, you might think that you're okay to go out, and you make a plan, and then that comes on that day, and you don't even want to go out the door. So we can be very changeable when we're grieving, and we have days where we're feeling a little lighter, and it's bright outside and it's sunny, and yep, tomorrow we can do that. And then tomorrow comes and you think, actually, I can't even get out of my pajamas. And again, that's what's really difficult with grief. It's so changeable. It's like an absolute roller coaster, and you never quite know what each day is going to bring. And you can feel like I'm getting through this. I'm doing it. I'm grieving. This is a good day. And then the next day might be really difficult again. And it's like, it's just holding on to that roller coaster and knowing that every day might be a little bit different.
You know, I'll be honest with you, I've never in my life had such a impactful and difficult conversation at the same time. Every time you end, I've got another question in my mind to ask you. So I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
It's I wanna kind of we spoke a lot about somebody passing, but there's also another type of grief I want to touch on, and that is somebody who hasn't passed, who isn't ill, who is not going to go anywhere, touch wood, for the next 50 years. They'll live a healthy, happy life, but they're no longer in your life. And this could be, I don't know, it could be parents, it could be siblings, it could be friends, it could be a work colleague who mentored you and you absolutely admire. It could be anyone who I guess you've had an emotional connection with, which is fairly strong. But then, through whatever circumstances, you're no longer together. Where do we start with that? Because that feels different because you're almost seeing this person on social media or maybe even walking down the street, but there is that relationship you once had no longer
Yeah.
exists. So
Yeah.
where does one go with that?
It's still the same grieving process. It's estrangement.
Really?
Yeah, because you're grieving for all the hopes and dreams of the future that friendship, relationship, whatever it was, family relationship, you're no longer having. So the process of the grief is very similar. You are grieving for the loss of that relationship and for the hopes and dreams of the future. So all sorts of feelings might be coming up. It might be guilt, it might be anger, it might be sadness. Again, all those very similar feelings that grief encompasses is the same with estrangement. And it's almost the opposite of that continuing bond, isn't it? It's like you don't want a continuing bond with that person for whatever reason, your choice or theirs. And if it's theirs, that must be really conflicting and really painful, because it's out of your control. And we're not necessarily, some of us are not very good with being out of control. And grief is absolutely, we feel out of control with it, which is why it can be really difficult to go through the grieving process, because you are out of control with grief. You never know when that next grief burst is going to come along. You might think, I'm having an okay day, and you're in a board meeting, and then suddenly there's a smell or a sound, and then you're in an emotional kind of state because of it, and you just never know when that grief burst is going to kind of come along.
So,
So yeah, there's, again, the grieving process and the emotions that come up are very similar, whether that person is still here or not.
so how do you handle that then? Because let's say you have a loving relationship with someone and they've passed away, you can go for that beautiful walk you once remembered and you can reminisce, and over time you can look at pictures and go, oh, you know, I love this person. But with the other side of things, you may not want to do that. So
Yeah.
what's the grieving process there? Is in because I don't think any. I know people can. People do say this. You know, they're like a light switch. I can turn it, turn off all my emotions, and
Yeah.
it's all done. I don't believe it for a minute. So the grieving process for a strain, sorry,
It's true.
estrangement. I can't say that. Estrangement. It feels. I guess not the grieving. The acceptance phase for that feels very different to someone passing away. So is there a nice way to accept and move on, or I guess not move on? Can you move on again from that?
Yeah, again. And then again, everybody will be so, so different.
Yeah.
I'm a really big advocate for journaling and writing things down because it gets it out of the
Okay.
body and out of your head. So I'm also a big advocate for writing a letter to the person that's bereaved, or if it's estrangement, writing to someone, but never actually sending it, and possibly even burning it or ripping it up. So it is the actual process of writing it down and reading it out and then potentially destroying it that can help. So that, I think, a lot of losses from a relationship perspective, there's lots of unanswered questions, communications that never happened. There's lots of I should have, I could have, I would like to. So in order to try and have some of those out of the body and out of your mind, write them down, write that person a letter, but just don't send it. It's just for you to write all your emotions down, write, exactly what you would have liked to have said, what you would have liked to have, those conversations that you never had that you would like to have done, and then almost have some sort of ceremonial kind of burning. So it's like, okay, I'm sort of releasing this and releasing it from the body, but releasing it from a physical perspective as well, like a tangible perspective, because it's in that letter.
Wow. So God, I don't think I said wow this much in a bloody podcast. For God's sake, I might have to edit a few of these out. Gosh, it's fascinating. You say okay, so journaling. I've heard that a million times over, right? I've heard journaling. You write down your thoughts at the end of each day or at the end of each. Some people do it on a specific day of the week, and in the
Yeah.
evening they spend an hour just writing things down. Or there's some people use their phone and just do it on their notes.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be written. It can be, you can be doodling, you can draw, you can scrapbook. It's just a way of getting it out of you and your body and your mind, because we have so many thoughts that go on and go round, and the best way to get them out is from a physical perspective. There's something quite cathartic about writing, and also, especially with grief, you can start to see a pattern and you can look back and go, okay, there's some progress here. It helps you see, because you don't necessarily always think that you're progressing, because I'm still really sad or I'm still really angry, but actually I can see a little bit of progress here. I was more angry there, or I felt differently there. So it helps when you've written it down. It gives you something back to refer back to.
You actually beautifully just answered my next question, and that was why is the letter so important, or a note, and then the burning or the disposing of it. And I think you've answered that perfectly.
Yeah.
I guess it's yeah, it's
We
just
have so many unanswered communications and so many things we want to
yeah.
say, and you can't always say them. Well, you certainly can't say them to someone who's no longer here. But even in estrangements, you don't want to say them if you've cut off from that person. But you have so many things that you want to say, so say it. Get them out on paper, and then
Mm.
get rid of that bit of paper.
So this is going to be a bit random, right? And I don't know if you would have ever been asked this question before, but it's weird. Okay, so I've got a dog, right? Um, and I've dreamt of having a dog since I was a little boy, and I finally got one, and he is like, oh, I love him so much. I love this boy so much. He is so cute. Yeah, absolute nightmare, but yeah, proper
Yeah.
love him.
Oh yeah.
But there's days where I'm absolutely petrified of losing him. How
Yeah.
weird is that? And he's still young. He's still young. But there's days, right, where I'm absolutely like there's days where I'm like, oh my God, one day you won't be here. And I get really freaked out. I'm like, oh my God, this is this is uncomfortable. So I quickly drift off and take him for a
I don't
walk
want
or
to
give
think
him a
about it.
treat. Or yeah, yeah, yeah. And my missus will be like, why are you giving him a treat now? And I'm like, just for existing, all right? Just for he deserves it for existing.
For being in.
So is that? normal? Is that because I can
Yeah.
assume people have this with their children, or I'm assuming I'm not the only person out
No.
there who feels these things. Is it normal to feel that fear on something you love that much?
Yeah.
Is it, am I normal? I don't know.
Yeah, you are absolutely normal. And that is what I end up saying most of the time. Your grief is normal. This is normal. It doesn't matter if it's 1 year later, 10 years later, grief is normal. And I did a talk on pet loss last week or 2 weeks ago, because
Oh wow.
pet loss is huge, but it's disenfranchised grief. It's not something that we particularly talk about very much, and it's not really recognized. It was just a pet. You can get another one. Those types of really helpful things that people say, which are absolutely not true, because there's often a reason that we get a pet in our
Mm,
lives, whether it's loneliness, whether it's there's a need in us to sort of look after something, whether we want to get out more, and therefore, if we have a dog, they'll make us get out in nature more. There's lots of different reasons that we get pets. And pet loss is when that pet has gone, whether they've gone tragically or whether through old age. Pet loss is really, they're such a significant part of our lives, and again, we weave them into our lives in such an intricate way that we are we're battered when they go, because
yeah.
our whole life has been shaped around that pet. So to think about them not being here is absolutely normal, because there's a fear. It's going to be incredibly painful when they go. And the pet loss talk I did was about when I had to say to the vet, take my dog away from me. My dog needs to be put down. She had cancer and she wasn't getting any better. And I knew it was that day and it had to be that day, but to have to make that phone call and ask someone to take the dog away from them, that was, I think, well, I don't even know, 11 years ago. And I still can't get another dog at the moment, because I can't, I don't want to have to make that call ever again. But I had, 11 years with her, and she was absolutely brilliant. She was an absolute menace, as you said, an absolute pain in the backside. But I'd have her back in a heartbeat, because she was a part of my life. She was my companion, and she was there.
Yeah.
And that's what I say in this pet loss webinar talk that I did, is that they are with us through the career changes, through the relationship losses, through our illnesses. They're with us. Whether that's through the working day or whether through our lives. They're with us for such a short period, but we go through so much with them in our lives that when they're gone, it's the silence, and it's the loneliness, and it's the no one's greeting me at the front door anymore. It is really hard to cope with. So absolutely, the fear is there, because you should outlive your pet. There's no guarantees, let's be honest, because none of us know when our expiry date is up. You know that your pet should go before you. That's really hard to cope with.
Yeah. Are you okay? Sorry, I didn't mean to bring that up for you. I didn't know. Are you all
Yeah, no,
right? That's quite a
yeah,
lot to talk about, you know.
yeah. And when we look at the amount of losses we've had in our lives, there's so many, and pet loss is huge.
Of course, of course. And I think one thing I'm scared of is one, I'll say it how it is.
Mm,
One of the main reasons I actually got my pup was because of loneliness. I don't
yeah,
have lots of friends, I don't have lots of
yeah.
family. And when he walked through the door, honestly, I'll tell you a funny story about him, right? He is so cute, right? Um, so we've got quite a long garden, and it was probably like the first few days he was in the house, and he just started getting his legs. He started like learning to run.
Yeah.
He had a right roly poly down the garden, didn't he? He was at full pace sprinting down, and he just tripped and just rolled and rolled and rolled, and he proper shook that one off. But it's like it's weird because you have these really beautiful memories of it could be a friend or it could be a family member, it could be a pet, and I feel like those are the beautiful memories you take on after they go.
Yeah,
Um,
they're
so
the
so I
ones you
guess
want.
yeah, exactly. That's fascinating. That really is. And I know we've touched on a lot here. We've touched on so much, but I've still got questions. So
You got a lot of questions still. A lot of
I
questions.
do, I do, I do. I'm so sorry.
You're all right.
Um, so we've spoken about living things, but what about things that aren't living, like a job?
Mhm.
Right? Because there's this really weird feeling leaving a job you've been at for a year or 2 years or 3 years, because you sense, I guess you come into like a community sense, Phil, and especially if you've got a small team and then you decide to move on, or for whatever circumstances, you're no longer a part of that team. there's a grieving process there as well.
Yeah.
But this is kind of like a happy grief because you're happy to move on because you may have got an amazing job, and you're also sad at the exact same time. Is there a word for that, or what is that?
Yeah, I mean that again, that is a loss. It's a loss of you're leaving something behind. You're leaving your old role behind. And redundancy, there's huge amounts of losses in redundancy because it's that rejection, it's that sadness again for the hopes and dreams of the future. So career is massive because a lot of our identities are built on our careers as well. So when that's taken away through us, not through choice, from a redundancy perspective, it's really hard to cope with because who am I now? That was my role, that was my identity. But when you're grieving and you've made that decision, yeah, there's still a grieving process because I mean, obviously there's the worries and the, concerns, have I done the right thing? And yes, you're having to start again in a whole new company and understand the company and the culture and the team that you're going to work with. And there's that loss of leaving that behind. So again, a grieving process. You potentially might go through it. Absolutely.
And it's you make it sound like it's a really common thing. Is it as common as we don't assume it is?
Think I think we don't realize that we're grieving a lot of the time. I think because mainly we tend to think about grief and bereavement, and it makes sense. So if someone's died, I'm grieving. But when we talk about it from divorce or menopause or a career or redundancy, you don't necessarily think of that. You don't correlate that with grief. But actually, it's loss. However you look at it, it is a loss. And some of the things that I get people to do is a timeline of all the losses in their lives. And whether that's pet loss, loss of health, finances, all the things we've talked about before. When you lay it out and you look at it with like a helicopter view and go, wow, I've been through a lot. In 1 year, and I'm just about to do a talk on mother loss around Mother's Day. So how to cope with losing a mother, because that's where my grief has come from. So that's my experience, and that's why I'm doing this talk. But in 1 year, sorry, I've gone off track there because what I wanted to say was in
No, that's
2019,
okay.
before I started talking about mother loss, in 2019, I had my pet put down. I shut a business that I'd been running for 15 years. I finished a relationship and I had to sell my house. So that's 4 losses in just 1 year, all in quite quick succession.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't necessarily think giving up your home is a particular loss. Some people wouldn't think pet loss is there's a grieving process behind it, but there was relationship loss, physical loss from my house, pet loss, all of that, and that was just in 1 year. So if you plot that timeline and look at all the losses that you've had, it's just huge. And then my biggest grieving process that I went through was with my mum, which came during COVID. So we had this unbelievable experience of COVID and the confusion and not understanding what was going on, and the world was falling apart. And then at that same time, my mum died. And it was just, honestly, the grief was absolutely battering. And that's why I now do this work, because I didn't know I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought, what is happening to me? My body, my brain, everything. I was just a completely different person. And I started to kind of do a deep dive and go, what is this? And I was like, oh, okay, it's grief. Okay. And it kind of took the pressure off, and it was like, oh, okay, so this is okay. I'm grieving, and that's okay. And I was like, why are we not talking about this? We need to talk about this more. So that's how this work started. So it's quite different from running a recruitment agency like I used to do for 15 odd years, and now work in, grief and loss.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I personally didn't know that story of yours, and from what I've learned today is you never really get over it. But are you okay? Like, are you
Yeah.
managing okay?
I'm very lucky to do this work now, because from a horrendous experience came a whole new career, a whole new outlook on life. Everything changed for me, and for me, some positives have come out of that, and I'm very lucky that I was able to find something that I absolutely have the biggest passion and privilege for now. So when I look back now, if you'd have asked me at the time, and even 2 years after, I wasn't fine, and now yeah. It's taken a while. I've had to go through my own grieving process. I had my own therapy, my own coaching, but I'm in the best place I've ever been now, really.
I'm so happy to hear that. You deserve that as well. And the question I had off the back of that is you said something really interesting. Did you find putting a label to it allowed you to acknowledge it and accept it. Because when I've got ADHD, so this is completely different. And I always knew I was a bit different, unique, if you like.
Yeah.
And then when I got diagnosed with OCD and ADHD, I found it was like a weight off my shoulders. It was like, I can now learn about this and manage it rather than always having the unknown. Is it similar when you specifically got that label or that word put onto your feelings?
Yes, absolutely. Because I went to the doctors and I didn't go to the doctors because it was COVID. I did everything over the phone and they gave me antidepressants. And I thought, I don't think I'm depressed, but it wasn't something I knew anything about. So I went with kind of what the doctor said. But it was only when I started to do my own research, it was like, this was 6 months into the grief. And I was like, so all these symptoms that I've got are grief. Why didn't the doctor just say to me, Kate, your mum died 6 months ago. This is grief. And I think that for me was the turning point where it was like, why are we not talking about this? Why did I not know that I was grieving and that it's okay to grieve? And I think that is the problem with society, that we try and push this, get over it, move on. It's been, insert however long you have in your own mind about how long someone should be grieving for and when they should be over it. And we've just got this society that's, brush it under the carpet, get over it. And I didn't, and I wasn't fine. And it wasn't until I held my hands up and went, oh, yeah, okay, I'm not fine, but it's grief. So it absolutely helped me to understand what was happening in my body and what was happening to me. And it absolutely took the pressure off. And actually,
Well,
there can be some loss with an ADHD diagnosis as well, because that's
for
a
me,
grieving process that you might have to go
yeah,
through.
I think for me personally, um, it was more of a relief. But then that's only because there was parts of my life I never really truly understood why I did things the way I did. And I never had an answer for them until I got the diagnosis and I was like, makes
Makes sense.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I know we've touched on quite a lot of solutions, but one of the questions I have for you is loneliness is a huge, huge factor in life right now. Not just for men, but for women, for everyone. So many people are struggling with loneliness. They may not even have someone to speak to. And I know we said journaling is
Mm.
a great way of releasing these emotions into kind of reality. Is there anything else people who don't have the finances to come and see an incredible person like yourself, or doesn't like journaling? They might think there might be some macho geezer who goes, journaling is for blah blah blah. Um, is there any other things people can do uh, to kind of regain that control?
Yeah, I guess it's the same with any kind of mental health, really, isn't it? And like, I'm a big advocate for getting out in nature. Get outside, get into a park, get into a forest, get near water, just be where there's nature, which is something that you can do on your own. I am a big advocate in community. In grief, you tend to want to isolate yourself because you just want to sit on your own and sit with that grief, or you don't want other people to see you because you might be in a particular emotional state. But I'm a big advocate for finding groups, finding people to talk to. There's lots of charities that can offer free kind of mental health support, and I'm a cruise volunteer as well, so I work with Cruise, which is a bereavement helpline. So you can sign up to that and have free bereavement support. There's a wait list, and it's slightly different to working one-to-one with someone, especially face-to-face. And I use quite a lot of creative techniques as well. So working face-to-face with me is quite different than being on the telephone, but equally it is great support. And so there's lots of charities that can offer, that free support. But if you want to try and do it on your own, yeah, like I say, journaling. But if that's not for you, then, getting out in nature, finding something that works for you, is that getting into the gym and working from a physical perspective, but also from a mental health perspective. There's grief yoga, which is really good for you somatically, which is yoga poses, which are great for grief, because again, you're releasing that grief and that tension out of the body. There's all sorts of things that you can do. But again, it's not the same for everyone. Everybody has some things work for others. And there's so many books out there as well that you can read. What I try and get people to do is understand grief. And it sounds ridiculous because it's like, well, surely we will understand grief, but we don't. We don't understand what's stored in our body. We don't understand how the brain is affected through grief. And there's lots and lots of reading and books to help you understand how you're feeling and what's going on for you, which kind of goes back to that other conversation that sometimes knowledge just helps, just takes the pressure off, and you go, okay, this is what I've got, this is what I'm doing, this is grief, and okay, now I've got to work with it.
Sure, absolutely. And I love connecting in nature because I'm a nature fanatic as well. And there is something beautiful about the leaves crunching as you walk and just hearing the water of a stream go by. And yeah, I completely agree. Okay, do you think there's anything from this conversation that we've missed and you'd like to add into it?
I want to reiterate that whatever you are going through, please talk to someone about it, because none of us have to go through anything alone. Community and support is the most important thing. And we might think that we can go through things by ourselves, but actually talking to someone, just sometimes it's just rearranging your own thoughts. They don't even need to say anything, but just being able to talk out loud helps you rearrange your own thoughts. And something that I learned not all that long ago is sometimes your thoughts aren't even true. And that's quite mind blowing to think about, isn't it? That my thoughts might not even be true. And actually, therefore, being able to get them out and kind of, dissect them and look at them and think about them out loud is a revelation in itself. So I just think the more people can be open and talk and be vulnerable, that's another, I talk about that all the time. Like, we've got this culture of being strong. And what strong seems to mean is actually masking how you're really feeling. And I don't want anyone to have to mask. If my friends were masking to me, I'm not doing my friendship. I'm not doing my job. You need to be vulnerable with me because I want to be vulnerable with you when I need to be. So I just try and be as open and vulnerable with people as you can. And if somebody is being open and vulnerable with you, please don't shut them down if there's tears. Be an advocate for talking and listening. We've got 2 ears, 1 mouth. Listen. We use that in sales. Coming from a sales background, we do that whole 2 ears, 1 mouth. But it's true in life, just listen. And sometimes it's what people aren't saying more than what they actually are.
Wow, yeah, absolutely. God, you ended me with another wow, for God's sake.
Loving the wow.
Kate, where do people find you? People are going to listen to this podcast and they're going to go, where do we find Kate? Where
They're
do we
going to go,
find her?
wow, hopefully. So me is Grieve Then Achieve. And basically everything, believe it or not, is based around Grieve Then Achieve. So I've got a Facebook group for anybody that's grieving or has experienced some loss and wants to meet other people that are going through their loss. That's Grieve Then Achieve. My own podcast, which I need to upload some more episodes. I'm very, very bad at uploading episodes. I need to crack on with that. But that is Grieve Then Achieve. My website is grievethenachieve.co.uk. Instagram, Grieve Then Achieve. TikTok, Grieve Then Achieve. And actually, can I just say, because I'm a little bit excited about it,
Yes.
obviously my channel is all very much about grief. I had 24,000 views on my video yesterday. I mean, I normally get 300 or 400, and suddenly 24,000 views and about 60 comments. I'm buzzing about it because 24,000 people got to hear, talk, see about grief. And I'm like, this is the conversations we need to be having. Let's talk about it more. So I was a little bit excited.
As you should be. That is an achievement within itself. There you go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all of the links I can and I'm going to stick them in the bio to make sure that people can easily find you, because honestly, the work you're doing isn't for the light-hearted. You really, really are an incredible person, and I hope you know that, because you deserve to know that. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thank you so much for your time and sharing all of this knowledge.
I know. I'm a mood hoover. I do know that. But hopefully I try and give people hope. That's all that I can give people is hope.
I love that. Thank you so much, Kate. I really appreciate you. Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Honestly, the more people we reach, the more support we can offer. And don't forget, Onward Shift isn't just a podcast. We've got a number of resources on our website, so please don't forget to check out www.onwardshift.com, where you'll find counsellors, keynote speakers, coaches, blogs, and so much more. Until next time, don't forget to keep having these important conversations.